Today in the show, I welcome former Imagineer Christopher Merritt and legendary Disney animation producer Don Hahn. Listen as we discuss their new book, being released in conjunction with Disneyland's 70th anniversary, The Happiest Place on Earth, The Incredible Story of Walt Disney's Disneyland. This coffee table book is full of art and photos never before seen by the public. It even includes early planning maps of Disneyland created long before what we previously thought was the quote-unquote first map. Listen as I chat with Christopher and Don about how this book came to be, the various names considered for Sleeping Beauty Castle, how a Universal picture was once featured in Main Street Cinema, and so much more. And if you'd like to make a little game out of this episode, grab your favorite drink and take a gulp anytime you hear potato salad mentioned. Enjoy my conversation with authors Don Hahn and Christopher Merritt.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Hello, Christopher, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast for the very first time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Super exciting.
And for his fourth Disney Coast to Coast episode, but the first time I can officially call him with a new title, even though I predicted this way back in 2015 on the show. Welcome back, Disney legend Don Hahn.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Please hold your applause till the end of the show. Thank you so much.
Happy to have you back. Always a pleasure. Thank you both for being here. I'd like to just start with how you both got involved in the creation of this great new book celebrating the 70th anniversary of Disneyland. Christopher, I know you were a former Imagineer, so we'll get to that in a second. But I'd like to start with Don because we know Don primarily from the world of animation. So how did you become one of the guys to write this theme park-focused book, Don?
I mean, like everybody, I love Disneyland. I grew up in Southern California in the San Gabriel Valley. But yeah, I lived my whole career in animation happily. So Chris and I didn't really know each other, but for some reason, we ended up having lunch together. And Chris may have reached out or whatever. And, I always liked hanging out with him. I love the book he did on Mark Davis with Pete Docter is probably where we got introduced. And I just thought, oh my God, this is great. What else are you going to do? And he said, well, I have some ideas about Disneyland. And so over a series of conversations, we just started talking about it. I know or knew nothing about Disneyland or enough to be dangerous. And sometimes I love projects like that because I learn a lot during those projects. So I was never going to be able to write this book alone. Chris is a insane, granular, detailed expert on Disneyland. He knows everything about it from construction to the potato salad they serve at the Blue Bayou. So for some reason, the two of us got together and were able to, collaborate on this thing. And I have to say it was tough. Not just because Chris is very difficult to work with, but the amount of material we found was stunning. And to be able to edit it, because our main goal, and Chris can elaborate on this, was let's show you something you haven't seen and tell you something you haven't heard. Let's not just make it old guys reminiscing. Let's make it something fresh that you've never seen before. And that was the marching orders. And I pushed on that in my, I'll call it amateur way, and try to find things out in the real world. And then Chris pushed on it with connections and friends of friends and people out there in the blogosphere that had a special slide you haven't seen before or a drawing that's never made the light of day. And then to top it off, and then Chris can elaborate, is the archives stepped up at Imagineering with maps of Disneyland that have never been seen before. And said, you guys should look at these. And Tom Fitzgerald and some great Imagineers there said, come on over. The doors are open. There's a story to be told here. And that just took this book off to another level that's never been done on a Disneyland book.
Christopher, how did you get involved? I mean, obviously there are many Imagineers who have a history with the theme parks and stuff. So how was it selected that you were the guy?
Several people have asked us about where Don and I met, and I think I actually may have figured it out, Don. We, back when I was working on the Mark Davis book, we had there was a Destination D, the East Coast version of D23, and in Florida, and they had a panel with former Jungle Cruise skippers, of which I'm one. Yeah, we've kind of been friends, and then I was always a kind of a fan of Don's work just in general. And then he did that. Is Yesterday's Tomorrow the correct title? I'm bungling it probably, but the
Yeah.
the Tomorrow book that you did. And then I was at, so then I made sure to get Don a copy of the Mark Davis book when it came out. And he very nicely got me a copy of the Yesterday's Tomorrow. And then we had lunch and talked. All my books have been on theme park history, and I kind of aim them towards for designers. Not, I mean, I love history, and history is a big part of it, but also for designers. I try and focus on concept art, production, what it's like to actually build these things, because it's kind of a secretive business in a certain extent. It certainly was for me when I was in my 20s and trying to break into the business and learn it. So anyway, that's kind of the jam of my books. And I thought, well, I'm going to pitch something. I thought, well, I'd love to do something on Disneyland, but all the Disneyland that I don't know. And the Disneyland I didn't know really well was like the first 15, 20 years of Disneyland. And especially things like all the oddball Tomorrowland attractions in 1955. I just kind of had a passing knowledge of that. And going back to my 20s, when I was at CalArts, I made friends with a gentleman named Leon Jansen, who was one of the two brothers who did the E-Ticket magazine, which was this fabulous, incredible document that you still can use today. They interviewed people like Harper Goff. I just thought, well, I'd like to do a deep dive, kind of like the E-Ticket magazine, on things I don't know a lot about. And so the early years, I'd not really ever studied. But I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to do things people haven't seen before. So I pitched an idea. I thought, well, maybe we could do like a 6-volume set. And the first volume would be like 150 pages, like just on Fantasyland in the 50s. So that would give you enough time and enough real estate to really get into it. Because during the research of the Mark Davis book, I found a lot of stuff that I thought people had not seen before. That was my pitch: do the first one, and then over the next couple of years, add to the volume, and then they'll be in a slipcase. First 5 lands, and then the last book would be a book called Lost Lands, about undone stuff. Publishing just wasn't interested in that. And I tried to do something with little punch out, little models from the show set. And they just weren't interested in it. And I kept approaching it different ways, and they weren't going for it. And I was kind of frustrated. And I remember calling Don up and saying, do you have any tips for me? You've been really successful with your books. And then Don, you had said, the Yesterday's Tomorrow book, you were going to do a sequel to it. And you kind of decided that maybe you didn't have enough material to do that. And then you said, maybe we should join forces, because I'm fascinated with Disneyland. And so then when we did that, and then we decided, let's pitch it as just making it Walt centric, just the first 15 years of Disneyland. And that appealed to them. And then as one book, as opposed to 6 volumes over this long period of time. And that seemed to turn the trick. And then my publisher on the Mark Davis book was the amazing Wendy Lefkon, who was for us on this book too. And so she's just been a real champion for us on this. So that's kind of the story, how we got to starting on it.
Yeah, the business of publishing, which I don't completely understand, it's like the business of streaming TV. There's so many people that have books or documentaries they want to do, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a Disney legend or whatever. It has to be a really commercial idea and something that's going to really return, at least break even, to a company like Disney. And Disney's great. I mean, Wendy Lefkon, who we worked with, best editor and publisher ever, but it's still a business, and that's what makes it hard.
The other thing too is, I tend to approach things from a very specific, very niche attitude, because I'm so deep into, I go down rabbit holes, and I'm things that are fascinating to me that might be fascinating to 20 or 30 other people, maybe not be fascinating to the general public. And so that was what was great about working with Don, because Don was really able to pull us back and kind of actually get to the humanity in the story. Right. If I had just done the book myself, it would have all been nerd rabbit holes on show set scene 5, Adventure Through Inner Space, and here's the flitter, glitter that they used on it, and they spread it on in a lumpy fashion, like a big bowl of potato salad or something. I would have focused in on that at a granular level that maybe would have appealed to some people, but not the vast majority. And it was really great, because Don kind of took the story in ways that I hadn't thought of. And before I forget to say this, because I'm so obsessed with showing new things that you haven't seen before, because I feel there have been so many books done on Disneyland. So what's the point of doing a new one? But what was great about it was I kept here's a thing you've never seen before. Here's another thing you've never seen before. And, sometimes it would be a case of I'd show it to Don and the team and be okay, yeah, but that's a crummy photo, right? Here's a crummy photo, but I'm yeah, but it's the only photo in existence of the thing. The Bounding Bighorn from Nature's Wonderland would be a good example. We found photos of that, but we cut it because it was not a great photo and it's not going to resonate with a lot of people, or the Wizard of Braz talking figure on Main Street. There is a kind of crummy half tone from a newspaper, but it's not, there's better shots. So, but the thing that was cool about that too, finding rare stuff, was then it sent Don on a quest to kind of match me, I think. So it kind of became a game of one-upsmanship. So like Don would like show up with, like, Don found this photo of Walt at Steeplechase in Coney Island in the 50s that I'd never seen or heard of before. I was like, where did this come from? Oh, Don probably dug for that. Or Don's research assistant, Amy Rogers, who's also amazing. She found things from the Chicago World's Fair that was just jaw-dropping.
It ended up being a good collaboration because of that, because it was competitive in the best possible way. Because I would go, well, like, I have never seen that before, Chris. Well, but you haven't seen this, and we'd find the guest book for the Chicago Railroad Fair, and here's Walt Disney's signature, and believe me, there's 3 books that could have been had out of the material we felt that we found. But I think that's what the pairing was good for, because Chris's knowledge of the park and my love of it. And I also have a deep love for Southern California amusement parks. Like, I owned Chris's books on Knott's Berry Farm and Marineland and that stuff long before I knew Chris, because I love that stuff. And we should collaborate, by the way, on Santa's Village, I think, is our next one. That kind of collaboration was really positive, because I could deal with the narrative and more of the human aspect of it. And then Chris's hunger for research was like nobody else.
But how do you actually split that work? Like, do you decide, oh, I'll start focusing on Fantasyland, you start focusing on Frontierland, or is it just kind of a free-for-all discussion?
Don, you can tell me if you remember it differently, but I just felt like we just hacked at it. One of the hardest things was, and again, you would occasionally pull my head out of the hole, but I tried to do something that was such a time suck and probably a bit foolish, but I gather every bit of, for all my books, I try to gather every bit of information that I can find, right? And I try and put it all in one place. In fact, Leon Jansen from the e-ticket, this is probably a common term, but he called them buckets, right? He's like, hey, Chris, you got to have your buckets, put your things in your buckets. So I'll have this ridiculous Word document where I've got quotes from so like in the Word document, I've got it broken down. Okay, Main Street, Adventureland, Frontierland, and in the Frontierland, here's a subsection on the Mark Twain, and the Mark Twain, then in that section, and I'll have it in chronological. I'll have excerpts from, interoffice memos about key dates, about things that were done at different times, or I'll have relevant quotes from interviews. So as I'm transcribing an interview or taking an interview that someone else has transcribed, I'll be scrubbing through it and I'll be going, okay, that's a good quote. And that'll match up maybe with that artwork that we found last week. So I'll grab that and drop it in. And so it becomes this ridiculous Word document. Occasionally I'll put an image in there, but mostly it's text. And it ended up being something like 800,000 words or something insane. And at a certain point, I was like, well, gosh, I could be doing this forever. And so Don was locking in on getting the text, but also I was we were both getting the photos in, and then I was doing the captions, and then the captions were back and forth. And even it's really hard because it's, it's, what are we, 340 pages?
Yeah. And man, every page was hard fought, not with each other, but just with the content.
And it gets exhausting. And I didn't know Main Street. So Main Street was really hard for me because there's so many shops that have changed 5, 6, 8 times since, and we're just talking 1955 to 1970 was kind of our cutoff date. Or I remember, Don, I remember you texted or emailed me once, and you're like, I'm drowning in the complexity of Haunted Mansion, or not Haunted, of New Orleans Square. Can you just kind of hack at it? So then I would hack at it, and then you would hack at it, and then it would go back and forth. And it was hard for me because I would lose things that I really wanted, but I also had to kind of force myself to zoom back and go, look, yeah, this little myopic thing that you wanted, there's a reason that it's being cut, And so at the end of the day, as we're rapidly approaching our pencils down date of where Wendy, our publisher, is we're 3 weeks, we're locking in, and we're you can't make any changes after 3, which is terrifying to me because I'm like, because we're constantly updating the text and we're constantly updating the captions. And even there's a few little mistakes in the book where I didn't catch it in time. No one caught it in time just because everything was so fluid. But, things like just something getting changed at the last second. I would just say, well, the one example is the uranium hunt artwork. But I would
Yes.
just say,
Yes.
I just realized at the end of the day, I need to just pick a few things that are the absolute most important and then say to Wendy or Don or whoever, these ones are the most important to me. Can we please, please, please keep those in or put them back? And so one of those was the uranium hunt artwork. And another one was a photo of my father and my grandmother and my uncle that my grandfather took in December of 55 in front of the firehouse station on the page that shows Walt's apartment. And that at the last minute got swapped with another one. And I remember like emailing Wendy and Don. I'm like, can we that's like the one photo for my grandfather, like means a lot to me and shows my dad.
Yeah, it's like, what is there? The famous George Lucas quote, films are never completed, they're only abandoned, or something like
You
that,
run out
right?
of time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's an emotional process.
Yeah.
It's an emotional process because we all love it and we want our readers to love it. We want to be honest to our historian friends, many of whom, guys like Tom Morris really helped us out.
Yes.
And so you really have to be very serious about the approach to it all. But I think, that's where Chris or I would push back on favorite things. Like I was really confused about New Orleans Square and about like the Haunted Mansion there's 10 stories to be done there in multiple books.
Yep.
And so Chris would push back and say, the most interesting story is kind of the stuff Ken Anderson did early on, or Pirates of the Caribbean. I thought, well, we have to do the kind of classic Mark Davis Pirates of the Caribbean. And we would go back and forth about that. And in the end, the walkthrough, early Pirates of the Caribbean stuff, the arcade, were all things people hadn't seen before. And if you want to get the Mark Davis version of it, you can buy a great book about Mark Davis. So in the end, the kind of collaboration and pushback that we got from each other was really great. Like I want to tee up the book with more about the ABC TV deal, just to understand that it came out of a really different era when television was so much of a big part of the funding of Disneyland. So anyway, it was a good collaboration that way.
So that part I knew almost nothing about. Like I focus on the design and the designers and the details of the attractions because that's what I do for a living and that's most interesting to me. But the ABC deal is crucial and Don knows a lot about it. Or the Chicago Railroad Fair, where it's clear to me now that's the turning point for Walt. He comes back with his hair on fire and like writes this memo to everyone in the studio, and he's describing Disneyland to a T in 1948. And from that moment, it's like, let's go. So things like that were great that Don brought to it that I wouldn't have brought to it.
I'm curious, since the timeline seems to be, basically Walt's lifetime at the park and a little bit beyond, was this book always intended for Disneyland's 70th anniversary, or was that just kind of a nice timing thing that publishing and marketing was like, hey, let's work it in here?
I would say it was never intended for Disney's 70th anniversary.
No.
It grew slowly, and as did the page count. I mean, the early page counts and the early budget for the book was much less than what it is. But I think the fact that it did kind of line up with the 70th anniversary, and again, with the help of our collaborators at Imagineering and at Disneyland, with some great collaborators there and still do in terms of the executives at Disneyland, it became the perfect lineup. And then the capper was when Michael Vargo, who's the head of the D23 kind of organization, said, well, we're looking for something to do for Disney's 70th. What if we give away your book? And it was the kind of thing an author doesn't even dream about because that stuff doesn't happen. But it was a good fit for D23 members, and people could join up as a gold member and get a copy of our book. And that led to a ton of stuff, and including, next weekend we're down at signing books at the park. And so it was an evolution, as most things are with Disney. I think people are hesitant to jump into the big idea sometimes because, everybody has their own little fiefdom part of the company. But when people start to see other people jumping on, then it becomes really exciting because they saw the potential in the book and they really jumped on.
Yeah, I remember Wendy telling me at the beginning, saying, Chris, this book is not going to be as big as the Mark Davis book. And I said, okay, I get that. But I said, also, I mean, this is like a really important story. And it's, we can't do this in 120 pages or whatever the original page count was. And she said, well, sorry, that's kind of what it is. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll do what we can. And I just hoped in the back of my mind that I thought, well, just kind of knowing how long things take now. And I just thought we will be close, if not right up on it. And I just kind of hoped and prayed that, exactly what Don described would happen. And I just thought then we could piggyback on the 70th promotion and get a bigger page count and more eyeballs on it, which is what happened. So thankfully, but and even our page count isn't even enough. I mean, there's like a 2-page spread with just some parades. And like I had a whole thing on the development of walk around characters. Like how do you translate a character into a 5 or 6 foot human being, and the development of the parades over the years, or 1967 Tomorrowland just has a smattering. And there's so much we could have done easily twice the page count on this thing.
Yeah, the holidays. It was just endless. And in the end, then Bob Iger jumped on, which was great.
Yeah.
We asked him to do the forward, and that all was kind of part and parcel of D23 and the anniversary. He was looking for something to kind of be a part of. So it's just one of those things where, and I think also between Chris and I, we know a lot of people. So Chris could call up an Imagineer that maybe I didn't know, or I could call up an executive that maybe he didn't know, and we could actually call in favors or tell him what we're doing. And we got a lot of cooperation from people just by our Rolodex.
And then also, I don't want to minimize, the collector community, because this is like, this is what I say to people. I said, if you're going to research, if you're going to do a book on any sort of Disney, any sort of history, really, but Disney history, yeah, for sure, talk to the archives. They have amazing things. And if it's theme park related to Imagineering, for sure. But, think outside the box and go to collectors and go to auction houses, because there are things out there that only exist. And a great example is there is a woman there. You probably are aware, a lot of your listeners are aware, there are a lot of blogs, like slide collector bloggers, like Disneyland centric or Southern California theme park centric. And they'll buy, either on eBay, or I would imagine it's more on eBay now than thrift stores, because I think that market's dried up. But the whole Charles Phoenix model of, buying grandma's slides that ended up at the Goodwill and finding incredible, photos in there and sharing those. There's a woman out of Michigan. She's a little bit older than me, but her father, who's in his 90s, took them from 1956 every year to Disneyland, like several times a year, took amazing photos with a Kodachrome color, so which doesn't fade. And to boot, he had an eye for composition. So that's rare, because a lot of times you'll see these amazing, full color, slides, and they're off kilter, or they just missed something. This man was kind of an artist with his shots and framed them really well. Thousands of slides. And she got on a plane and flew from Michigan out here, and sat with myself and Jason Schultz, who helped us out a lot too with his incredible Park Endium archive. And we scanned, a lot of those, hundreds of those slides for the book that they let us use, just for free, just because it made her and her father happy to see them in print. So some of those gorgeous Main Street shots are from them. And there's lots of other examples of other collectors who very generously contributed things. But you just kind of have to, if you want to find new things and you want to take a different approach, you kind of have to really beat the bushes and think outside the box and look elsewhere.
Yeah, I would assume, especially in the case of something like this, where the timeline was before 1970, because the Walt Disney Archives was officially founded in 1970. So I would imagine there's a lot more stuff in the archives 1970 moving forward, considering they know, hey, we now officially have an archives. Like, was there anything you were looking for in archives that you couldn't find?
There's a weird split, Jeff, because it's like, there are things from that really probably should be part of the Imagineering collection and archives, and vice versa. Because if you think about it, how it happened, Imagineering's at the studio, until the early 60s, and then they move to Glendale. So a lot of things that are done at the studio level kind of just end up in the archives by actually being there at the studio. But then you've got artists who are working on things who end up in Glendale, and then they retire in the 70s or the 80s, and maybe they give it to the Imagineering archives, but maybe they don't. Maybe they give it to Dave Smith in the archives. So like the box of stuff with the Uranium Hunt artwork, and had a ton of other amazing things in it. My personal theory, although I can't prove it, is those came from Claude Coates when he retired. And he just he was probably cleaning out his office and put them all in a box and walked them over to Dave Smith and said, here. And it got put in a warehouse and then just kind of, maybe lost track of, I don't know, but things like that. So not to mention there are, blueprints and drawings of certain buildings and facilities in document control only at the studio and not at Imagineering. When I did the Mark Davis book, I found certain things about 800 Sonora that were only at the studio. Tom Morris is an expert at telling you where to find different things, but it's all spread out everywhere.
We had a great connection to the Walt Disney Family Museum, and they have stuff that nobody has. So they were generous with their materials, and they're actually mounting an exhibition later this year based on the book to put on display a lot of things that maybe we didn't get in the book. So, it's just a diversity of contributors, as Chris was saying, makes it exciting.
There are these amazing photos of the Library of Congress, right, which I used a lot of in the Mark Davis book. But people ask me, like, these photos, these black and white photos, they're unique in the sense that they really show Walt and the Imagineers at work, and they're not posing, right? I've said this before, Don, in our other interviews, but people will come in and you're working on a project and they'll say, hey, pretend like you're working, and you'll like that. And it's just kind of really clear that you're posing. But these shots were really unique. And I was doing research on the Mark Davis book, and I was looking at a Look magazine article on the World's Fair and had these photos. And I thought, these are really great photos. Whenever I see those, my first thought is, who is the photographer and where are the outtakes? Because there might be things that are interesting that no one's seen. So Look magazine went bankrupt. Where did the assets go? I find out the assets went to the Library of Congress. I go to the Library of Congress website. There's no images on the Library of Congress website, but there is a drop-down menu with sort of vague descriptions of what they are. This is all for the Mark Davis book. And then I get in touch with them and they go, yeah, we have all this stuff. There's whatever nominal fee to do a preliminary scan to show you what they might be, whatever it would cost. So then I've got to go talk to Wendy, our publisher, and say, Wendy, like, I have my spidey senses are tingling. I think, could we pay them to just do a pass and show us what might be in here? And she goes, okay. And so she does. And then it comes back and it's this treasure trove, hundreds of, and then since then, so we used obviously the Mark Davis book, but also a certain amount of these in Don and our book and Disneyland book. But since then, Tom Morris has done more digging with them, and they've got stuff going back to the 50s that no one saw before. They've got stuff, Tom was showing stuff last weekend. They've got stuff in Walt's backyard that we would have killed to use in the railroad section. I mean, there's just jaw dropping.
I'm sure. There was a really famous National Geographic issue in 1963, I think it was, all about Disneyland. We kind of poked around and found out all the photography from that is still in the Nat Geo archives. And fortunately, Disney owns Nat Geo now. So we called up and they said, oh, yeah, we have all that. What do you want? And like, they're sort of generously saying, okay, here's everything. And so there's these great stills in there, some of which were in the Nat Geo, edition of Nat Geo's magazine. But that kind of dig is so exciting for us on this book, because we were able to find things again that hadn't been seen, and work with people that, are great historians that really have dug deep into this stuff, much deeper than we have, to find those insane stories.
Very cool. Well, one of the things you've talked about quite a bit that I wholeheartedly agree with is that this book is full of minutia stuff that, like, you haven't heard about a million times. And that's what I always look for in a Disney book, because I'm one of those people that has a stupid amount of Disney knowledge in my brain. So
yes, you do.
Thank you, Don.
Join the club.
So I have a list of some things that were like kind of new to me that I'd love to touch on further, and we'll see how many of these we can get through. But one of the first things right at the top of the book that kind of blew my mind was, for so many years, we've thought of that original Disneyland map created by Herb Ryman. And you immediately let us know we found this map created by Marvin Davis. And this was an early Disneyland map that he worked on with Walt, featuring a central hub surrounded by a railroad, years before the Herb Ryman ones. How did you discover this? Did you know this before starting research for this book?
I got a phone call. Chris, I don't think you were in this loop right away.
Nope.
I got a phone call from Wendy Lefcon, who had got a phone call from Tom Fitzgerald, legendary Imagineer. He said, we just found all this stuff, and it was in the archives, but it was rolled up in tubes, or it was in steel file cabinets. And Mike Jusko, their archivist, had pulled it all out for a look. They said, do you want to sneak over and just see if there's anything here you can use? And there's a photo of it in the book, actually, and it is a stunning kind of parade of drawings that Marvin Davis did. That is, at the time, he said he did like 135 of these iterations with Walt, tapping him on the shoulder, saying a little to the left, a little to the right. And what I love about him is it shows this huge process before Herb Ryman gets to it, with complete respect to Herb Ryman. But Herb Ryman was a brilliant illustrator, and Marvin Davis was a brilliant kind of site planner and was the perfect collaborator with Walt. So for months before Herb Ryman's famous weekend, Marvin Davis is going through these iterations, and they were not site specific. For a few of them, they were about Riverside Drive, but then they quickly became, when that wasn't available, they quickly became agnostic when it came to the site, and they were just rectangles. And then eventually they started to become triangles, and then eventually when Anaheim came into the picture, they became more site specific. But Marvin Davis, I mean, what a hero. And we printed page after page after page of these maps, so you can sit there with a loop if you want to and zone in on them. But what a story that was, to be able to uncover that and share it. And we were embargoed against talking about it. And in fact, in the early drafts of the books that they would send to us, it was all blacked out so that even the layouts were not shareable or lookable by any of us. So we had this whole redacted kind of section of the book for many months. But what an exciting discovery that was.
What was great about it, I'm becoming a little bit of a master planning nerd. At my job, one of my bosses is a man named Scott Sinclair. You should look up. So he's one of the guys who concepted Tokyo Disney Sea with Bob Weiss and Steve Kirk back in the 90s. So he's one of my direct reports, and he does a lot of master planning for a lot of our clients. And I'm always bugging him because master planning is a real specific skill set, for theme parks. It's a kind of a niche thing. But it's kind of fascinating. And so what's great about this is this allowed us, a couple of these maps actually have been seen before, but a lot of them have not. And this is the first time that we're able to show a progression of how Disneyland was going to look when it was across the street from the studio at Griffith Park, all the way to the Anaheim location. And like Don said, you see the hub, which is the most revolutionary, thing in theme park design that Walt came up with, I would say, develop in real time as you see the progression of the master planning over many pages. To me, it's completely fascinating. And it's also interesting to see, Don said, get out a loop. I would say a lot of these, just because I'm so grateful the book is big. A lot of these you can see without a loop, and you can see a lot of these weird, crazy pants attractions that are some of them make it and some of them don't. Like Walt was always trying to do a Granny's Cabin thing from So Dear to My Heart in different locations, and even it was kind of interesting last week, Don, at the Hyperion Historical Alliance, one of the presenters had found an acetate for presentation purposes for early prospectus people for Disneyland. Believe it or not, it was the voice of Nat Weinkauf reading it, which was weird because he's like a short little diminutive kind of Polish guy with a little pencil thin mustache. And he sounds very like, Winston Hibbler-esque, which is not how I would have thought he would have sounded at all. Anyway, the man who was doing the presentation was showing this playing the audio from the acetate with the prospectus images for Disneyland. And one of them, he's just going on and on about Granny's Cabin. So that's a thing that Walt tried to do. You see it in the master planning on these maps. I know he tried to add it into Rainbow Caverns at one point, or you were going to see it when you were on the mule ride as you walked around. Never kind of quite happened. But you see it pop up in different areas. So I don't know. Again, that's a great example of a nerdy rabbit hole that I like to go down and go, well, it was here and here and here. You know what I mean? That may not be fascinating to everyone, but to me, it's kind of fascinating.
There was a series of shops along the river in Frontierland-ish that would have been incredibly charming, scaled down to Disneyland scale. And they had gotten as far as designing the exteriors and interiors of the shop and approaching licensees to say, okay, this will be a candle shop, this will be a bell shop, whatever. And it was in the feeling of, the harbor where the dry dock is for the Mark Twain. And yet it was so thoroughly designed and never came to fruition. But we discovered all these drawings and were able to put in the book and show what that would have been. And part of me aches for that, because you go, oh my God, that would have been so charming and interesting to wander through all these shops. A lot of that turned into the feeling you get when you walk through New Orleans Square, that really human, tactile, analog kind of feeling you get. But that kind of exploration was interesting to us. The other thing, too, going back to what Chris was saying just about site planning, there's a great drawing we found of Walt's. And these guys were dealing with limited real estate. So you have pieces of land like where the canal boats are that also include Casey Jr., that also include the Skyway, that also include the train around Disneyland. So you have four things going on in this little postage stamp. In Frontierland, the same thing was happening, except on steroids. You had trains, you had Nature's Wonderland, you had donkeys and mules, you had stagecoaches, Conestoga wagons, a million different things. And the complexity of that tiny little piece of land is insane, to the point where Walt ended up doing some of the drawings himself to show what he thought could work there. And Chris stumbled across Walt's drawing to be able to say, oh, look at this. Walt took this home one night with some tissue paper and did it himself. And it's pretty much the way it ended up. So things like that, I think, are great to share. That it's an incredibly collaborative place. We try to shine a light on Imagineers and collaborators that maybe you haven't heard of before, but then also shine a light on what Walt did. He was a great guy for surrounding himself with smart people, but also could step in himself when he had to.
I love that story, and we're trying to put you in the place and time of sitting there with Marvin Davis as he's iterating, trying to figure out the Rainbow Caverns and the Pack Mule layout. It's a complicated master planning layout, and he's doing all these iterations, and Walt is going, no, no, no. And at a certain point, he hands him a piece of trace paper and just goes, would you just take it home and do it? And Walt takes it home, probably to his barn, and does it and brings it back the next day. And that's how they do it. And it's actually quite a masterful layout.
Yeah, I found it interesting because I always heard it when they were talking about building in Burbank. I always heard the term Mickey Mouse Park being thrown around. And in your book, it mentions how the Burbank Review called the park Disneyland. And I didn't realize it had been referred to as Disneyland that early on.
Yeah, there was even earlier iterations of Disneyland when Walt was thinking about doing a train tour where he would have his miniatures on display on a kind of whistle-stop, literally, tour of different cities. But the idea of putting his stuff on a train and touring, it was implausible because there wasn't enough crowd control and you couldn't get enough people through a train car and all that stuff. But that was Disneylandia or Disneyland early on. And again, if you look at the minutes of the town hall and city council meetings in Burbank, they're extensive and multiple visits that Harper Goff and even Walt made to the city council. And it was inconclusive at the end, and nobody called it Mickey Mouse Park. Nobody. And we confirmed this with the archives like 10 times. Everybody called it in modern day kind of parlance, the Walt Mickey Mouse Park. It was never referred to that except maybe in one newspaper article or something. So we try to debunk a lot of things like that just weren't factual over time. Like the Burbank City Council turning down the park because they didn't want an amusement park in their backyard. Not completely true. There may have been an element of that, but the real reason is the freeway was going through. Eisenhower was putting in the interstate freeway system, and the parcel of land on Riverside Drive where the park was supposed to go bordered on the LA River, and the freeway just took it out. And so the original plan to put it there and be able to tour through the studio and have a train go into Griffith Park had to be dumped because the freeway was coming through. I think long before that, though, Walt was probably thinking, there's not enough land here. Let's just start to expand and we'll figure out how to pay for it.
Jeff, the thing about saying Mickey Mouse Park, right? You've heard that a bunch, right? You probably took that as gospel, that that's what it was called at some point. So, we find out that it never was. Don, like you said, triple check with the archives, but also the reason that we know that the Burbank City Council didn't, blatantly reject it on its face is because Tom Morris got them to pull all the meeting minutes and went through all 600, 800 plus pages of the meeting minutes and scrubbed through and it just doesn't exist. And there's a lot of supposedly apocryphal stories out there. We didn't focus in too much on it, but things like, women's high heels melting in asphalt, on opening day. Well, when you come to look at it, you find out there's no mention of it before a Dick Nunes newspaper interview in 1975. And then after that, you see everyone mention it. But before that, you don't see it mentioned at all. Then you go back and you look at it and you go, well, the temperature only got up to 86 degrees that day. Well, that's warm, but maybe not hot enough to melt asphalt. Then you're looking at photos of them laying down the asphalt the week before they open. And, and then you're seeing the day before, they're prepping for this major ABC. I don't know, how many cameras was it, Don, that they did for the opening?
Oh, an insane amount. They had to bring in cameras from San Francisco and all the Western states just to supply the number of cameras at the park, the largest number of broadcast system ever. Yeah.
But there's in one of my current decks, there's a photo the day before, all the cars lined up on Main Street, parked on that asphalt, helping to set up heavy vehicles. And then the next day, there's a big parade with heavy wagons, horses with horseshoes. Bob Gurr is driving the Autopia vehicles. There's all this heavy stuff going on the asphalt. Why aren't there tire tracks left in the asphalt? Why are there not vehicles sinking on the asphalt because it's melting, because it's not cured yet? I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying there's a lot of apocryphal stories out there. The one that will not die on social media that makes me crazy is the red and white light bulbs at Coke Corner on Main Street. I defy you to find a photo of that's more than 20 plus years old. But with regularity, I see people pop up and say, on opening day, Walt Disney, they thought, well, we can't have alternating light bulbs. So he got on a ladder and painted the light bulb red. Well, there's photos of this, you can zoom in and you can see they did red, white, red, white, red, white all the way around. But that story is probably never going to die. And you're not going to convince people on Facebook otherwise. So it's probably a fool's errand, but it's just like getting some of these apocryphal stories out there that have like calcified in the cultural zeitgeist, like a big bowl of potato salad. Like you've just got to you've got to make people think about those things, right?
And it's interesting. First of all, that could be its own whole separate book there, but it's interesting because, the company at some point adopts a lot of these stories. In fact, I think I've heard the red, white light bulb story on a tour at Disneyland.
Right.
And one that I read about recently in a different book, and you mentioned in your book, is the use of the word audio animatronics, which for many years, the company said the first audio animatronics figure were the Tiki Birds. But then you mention it in Nature's Wonderland. And so there's definitely, things we're learning, but I'm curious when you do discover one of these things and you're like, hey, we want to set the record straight. Like, how many boxes do you need to get checked from the Walt Disney Company?
It's an awkward conversation, and thankfully, I'm going to say we didn't seem to get a ton of pushback on this go round. But when you're doing things like, a good example would be on the haunted house walkthrough, which Ken Anderson really did. He really was the art director and the designer of, but a lot of different pieces of concept art were done for that walkthrough. There are these pastel drawings done with colored pastel on basically black construction paper. Your listeners have probably seen them. Those drawings have been attributed to Ken for forever, and it all goes back to an e-ticket interview. And so if you go back and you pull the tapes, which the Walt Disney Family Museum has the e-ticket collection, and you listen to Jack and Leon interviewing Ken, you have to factor in a couple things. First of all, Ken had recently had a stroke. So number one. Number two, in the 90s, unlike animators who I feel like in the 70s really, the animation starts getting treated as a legitimate art form that needs to be studied in the 70s. But by the 90s, theme park design isn't quite there yet. And so Jack and Leon, and I would say Bruce Gordon and Dave Mumford of Do the Nickel Tour, were kind of the only people really doing serious tracking down these Imagineers, interviewing them, and getting their stories. So they're getting attention for the first time, is my long-winded point. So they're sitting with Ken and they're talking with him about the Haunted Mansion and the Haunted House and the walkthrough version. And they're saying, Ken, did you design the Haunted Mansion? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, Ken, did you do all this artwork? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, it's a casual conversation. He's getting attention for the first time. He might not be paying as much attention as he should be. You have to take all these things into account. And then when I look at the artwork, it never sat right with me because if you know Ken's line, first of all, he was a trained architect. Secondly, if you look at any of his work from 100, his background or, previs work for 101 Dalmatians or Jungle Book, it's all very sketchy, pen and ink line work. And the stuff he did for the walkthrough is in that vernacular, that shape language. The pastel stuff looks nothing like it. But what it does look like is other artwork that's in the Imaginary collection by a man named Dwayne Alt. Dwayne Alt is still with us. I'm sorry to keep referencing Tom Morris, but he's doing a lot of really great work. Tom felt the same way. He got in touch with Alt's family, They said, yeah, we think that's by our dad. Let us check with him. They checked with him. He said, oh, yeah, I remember doing those. So then we give that information to Imagineering and they go, oh, okay, so we make the adjustment. Or even I would say, like, I screwed up on several things in my Mark Davis book. There's a plan view of that Pirates wax museum. I attributed it to Claude Coates. Becky Klein in the archives had attributed it to Bruce Bushman. When I really looked at it, I think Becky was right, because if you can compare the handwriting of Bruce Bushman to that artwork versus Claude's artwork, it really matches Bruce's a lot closer. So we made that adjustment in this book. But it's not always an easy conversation, because when these things are like written down as fact, you've got to like convince and really show your work, right, is what it comes down to. And sometimes it's impossible to show your work because it's so buried in the past. Sorry if that was too long-winded down the rabbit hole, but that's kind of my thought on all that stuff. It's like, I'm just very invested in, let's get the real story as much as possible out there. And then if I make a mistake, I want to own that mistake and fix it on the next iteration if I can. So
I think it's well said. And we're lucky because the archivists at Disney want to do the same thing. And so we would call them up and say, we think this is not true. What do you think? And we would call our colleagues that are historians too. And so that process, and this was not dealing with lawyers or anything. It was really just dealing with our archivists who are spectacular and want to find the truth as well. So that's been good. And we tried to cover that. We wrote about the Indian village. The most contentious one I thought would maybe get cut from the book was there's an actress named Aileen Lewis who played Aunt Jemima at the park. And one could argue that it was inappropriate to talk about Aunt Jemima. And I just feel like that is so wrong. Here's a woman who was at the park for almost 10 years. She played a character like other actors and actresses that played characters. It was a different time for sure. Was it inappropriate? Maybe. And you have to put it in the context of history. But still to be able to write about that in this book was great. And the fact that our Disney colleagues didn't ever try to cut it or pull it out of the book was a tribute to kind of the collaboration we were able to have.
Yeah, I'm just so in love with what Don wrote about the Indian camp, because I thought we would not be able to really cover that. And it's really lovely what he wrote there, because you come to realize that, especially in the woman's name, I forget, Don, but one of the young women, she becomes a Native American activist, later in the 70s. And she talks about doing the Indian Circle and the Indian camp as a way to educate people in the 1950s who really their only knowledge in a lot of cases are, Gunsmoke and Bonanza and basically, cowboys murdering Native Americans on TV, right? So here's a chance for them to say, here is our history, here is our heritage, here are our beautiful traditions, here are our amazing things, not in a negative sense, not in a degenerative sense, but in a really positive, beautiful, amazing, uplifting sense. And that was really great that Walt was behind, because Walt could have portrayed it in a really negative way, frankly, during the 1950s, and he chose not to. He chose to portray it in a really beautiful, loving way that really honors the history of Native Americans. So
yeah, her name is Vivian Arvizo, and she became a activist for Native American rights.
One photo in the book I want to talk more about, this Phantom of the Opera photo at the Main Street Cinema. What was this? Where did this come from? Why was a Universal picture being shown at Disneyland? And also, what was the interior of Main Street Cinema looking like at that point?
Well, always the same, right? I mean, so first of all,
it was always 6 screens.
Yeah, so you have to rewind back to the 50s and 60s, and I think that's a 60s shot. I believe that's 60s when that happened. For a brief time, what Jeff's describing is there was a actor or a face actor wearing a Lon Chaney adjacent Phantom of the Opera mask and cape and top hat, standing outside the theater on Main Street. And of the silent films, they would show, some of the silent Phantom of the Opera in there, among other Mickey Mouse shorts and things. Now they wouldn't, because it's modern day and Universal has big competitive theme parks, and they wouldn't want to have something that would, promote the competition. But back then, Universal Studios Tour is not what, Universal Studios Parks and Resorts are today, folks. So number one, that's not an issue, right? Number two, it's kind of in the cultural zeitgeist.
It's from a novel. It's from a 1910 novel, and it was a movie.
Yeah, but it's also like evocative of its time, right? Like, I mean, it's like, you're talking about, you're trying to get people back in the mindset of like, what was it like in 1905 in a small town and showing little silent films, or 1910 ish. And so that was why that was, but there weren't like Phantom of the Opera, like decorations on the inside. It was always what it basically sort of kind of is today. It was just a face actor to kind of add zhuzh to Main Street, if that makes sense. And for anyone who collects slides or frequents the Disneyland slide blogger sites, that photo shows up like, that character shows up with some regularity because just it was such an obvious thing to take a photo of in the 60s. I forget how long it was there. It wasn't there for forever, but a lot of people remember it.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was part of Walt. This I didn't know this either. Walt wanted everybody on Main Street to be a licensee that had been in business in the turn of the century. And I thought, what? But every shop and every licensee, whether it was an underwear store or a pharmacy or Wurlitzer Pianos, had to have been in business in 1900 to qualify to license a store on Main Street because it was such a museum and time travel back in that era. That's how careful they were about it. But so I think it wasn't unusual to see Phantom of the Opera there because that was a turn of the century or nearby character. It's like seeing. The Lone Ranger was in Frontierland.
Yeah, or like Errol Flynn, out like an Errol Flynn, like it would have been akin to something like that. It was not something that people would have questioned or thought, why are they showing the competition? Universal was not thought of as the competition in 1962 or whenever this was, which I forget the date.
I just love that the Phantom of the Opera was on Main Street. That's great. And it was interesting to see how, all of the shops on Main Street were really like educational in those early years. Like that was really intended and fascinating. And I think, Don, you were saying they all had to have been in existence in 1900. And if I'm remembering correctly, your book said, and they had to have been in business for like 50 years or something, right? So that it was like a recognized name.
Yeah, exactly. And so putting that parameter on it, and it's somewhat the same for Frontierland, not quite as much, but putting that parameter on Main Street could have been difficult. They may have had to turn down licensees that weren't in business at that time. But when you walked through the tunnels into Main Street, it was 100% immersion into that time, from the smells to the music to the architecture to the people, to the costumes, to the kinds of things that were in the stores and the educational things. Like there was a bank on Main Street because it was pre-credit card, and Bank of America also had a mini museum on the history of money, or the key and lock shop on Main Street had a history of locks. And so that kind of immersion and education was, I vaguely remember it, but I'm not old enough to remember the real opening day stuff. And it was a revelation to know how careful they were about teaching along with amusing.
I was just going to say, the other thing to keep in mind is that, both Don and I grew up in Southern California going to Disneyland with regularity. And Don obviously got to go way before I did because I was born in 1970. But I mean, we both have. It had a lot to do with me wanting to be a theme park designer. And I don't know if it had a lot to do, Don, with you wanting to work for the Walt Disney Company, but but there's this emotional, I grew up there. I've got pictures of me with my family there when I was really little. It's some of my earliest childhood memories. Like I remember going on Nature's Wonderland before they tore it out for Big Thunder. Like I remember riding the train and looking up at that bobcat, like on, balancing on the cactus. Those memories are deeply, deeply ingrained in me and deeply emotional for me. So to get the chance to do this has been a real honor, and it almost makes it hard to approach a project like this objectively and think about what's the most important thing that we should focus in on. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know, but it's definitely like a heartfelt, emotional, tied to our memories of growing up with our family thing as well.
Christopher, considering I've read your Knott's Berry Farm book, and considering you have a wide knowledge of that subject matter, I've got to ask this question. You mentioned the book, The Chicken Plantation Restaurant, and you kind of compare it to Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner Restaurant. And Walt Disney and Walter Knott knew each other. They were friends. But one of the things I find interesting is when you go to Knott's Berry Farm today, there's a big banner hanging out front that says America's First Theme Park. And I think a lot of people credit Disneyland as that. And I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are on that.
Clearly, I love Knott's deeply, and I take a bit of umbrage with that. That's a bold statement. That's like saying voted number one pizza place in El Segundo. I don't know. Well, who voted that? Yeah, what poll was there, or who issues that award every year? But regardless, you have to define the word theme park. to start with. Like, what is a theme park, And I would say that what we consider a theme park today, like I do not consider Six Flags Magic Mountain or certain other Six Flags parks. And I have to say that with a caveat because Six Flags is now, since they've merged with Cedar Fair, they own Knott's Berry Farm. But I would say a typical Six Flags park, as you would think of mainly roller coasters, hard iron rides, a few shows and things, I would not consider that a theme park. I would consider that an amusement park. So that is kind of the line of demarcation for me. I would say if there are more than 3 or 4 or 5 or more heavily themed dark rides or attractions that have an abundance of theme to them, show set, animatronic figures, some sort of a story or some sort of an environment. I'm not talking about a roller coaster. Like I'm not talking about the Batman roller coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain would be a good example where there is some show set, right? There is some little set pieces and you go flying around and you go through some of them. I don't consider that a theme park attraction. I consider that a roller coaster with some show set. So for Knott's to say America's first theme park, well, Knott's certainly wasn't a theme park when it opened. Knott's first of all, if you're going back to 1920, it literally is a farm. And then, you get to the late 20s, early 30s, and it becomes a restaurant with a few things to see and still a working farm. And it, like Russell Knott told me, it grew like Topsy. Right. There was no master planning for Knott's Berry Farm. And it's one of the reasons that Walt's design of the hub is so revolutionary because you can find, it's in terms of wayfinding. If you're out in the outer ends of Disneyland, pretty easily how to get back to somewhere to get out. Knott's Berry Farm and many other amusement parks, not so much. I do consider Knott's a theme park because of attractions like Bud Hurlbut's Calico Mine Train and the Log Ride and Knott's Berry Tales. And a lot of the theming in Camp Snoopy is very rich and a lot of the landscaping is really wonderful. There has been a proliferation of roller coasters since, the mid 70s that have, since, by the late 80s throughout the 90s that really became more Six Flagsy and less theming. And that's not a good thing as far as I'm concerned. But, it is something that a lot of parks do because it is relatively inexpensive. It's like a quick fix, right? We're getting into how do you get people for the next summer, get your gate receipts up. And that's one way to do it is you can put in a roller coaster, add a thin veneer, almost a thin cream from potato salad over the top of it of theming, and just call it a new roller coaster, and you'll get a spike in attendance, for a few months. But it also is going to drop off pretty quickly, and people are going to get tired of it pretty quickly. It's almost like someone shorting a stock or something. I don't know, because if you spend the extra money and the care to design something that's richly themed, beautifully executed, like Walt Disney did, or like Bud Hurlbut did with the Calico Mine Ride is a great example of that. What you're going to do is it's a lot harder to do. It's a lot more expensive to do. It takes a lot more time. And that's the reason that a lot of people don't do it, right? It also takes a certain skill set that a lot of people don't have, right? Like it's the theme park. I'm going to say the theme park higher end design, people who design for Disney and Universal and other high end parks. That is a very small kind of incestuous group of people who know how to do it. And there's not a lot of people who do know how to do it, I would say. It sounds kind of arrogant, but it's just factual. So it's hard to do. That's why you don't see it a lot at these other, what I would call amusement parks. I don't know. I'm getting really off the subject of our book, but it's interesting to me that someone calls an amusement park a theme park. To my mind, it's not a theme park. But then when you go back in time and I'm working on a book on the history of Coney Island from the late 1800s to the 1920s, because I think that's primordial theme park and kind of the basis of the kind of things, especially Luna Park and A Trip to the Moon and some of these early attractions that had heavy show set. And they're mixing, scenic railways with, you go into a tunnel and then a light comes on and there's some sort of beautiful scene that some person just worked on in Brooklyn or whatever and made this thing. That's kind of ground zero of what we do today. You really have to define when did Knott's become a theme park? And it's hard to put a marker down in when did Knott's become a theme park. I do consider Knott's a theme park. I don't consider Knott's the first theme park. I would say if you have to make a choice, it really is Disneyland. That's the first theme park.
I do want to talk about the castle because I've always been so impressed with the fact that from day one since the park opening, it was referred to as Sleeping Beauty Castle. Considering the park opened in 55, the film came out in 59. Talk about having faith in your product. I love that. But I also love the research you all did and found out it was referred to before the park opened in plans as Medieval Castle, even sometimes Robin Hood Castle. And then there was Fairy Tale Castle and Snow Mountain, kind of foreshadowing the Matterhorn. I find all of that really fascinating, but I am a bit surprised that you never came across anything that referred to it as Snow White Castle. I would have expected that to be like the easy go-to.
Some of these things come from a prospectus where they're describing it, and someone's trying to come up with flowery prose, and they're just pulling it out of where, and just dropping it in to get something down. So there's that. You have to take that into account. There's also things like, I seem to recall there's an early e-ticket magazine where they're talking about board games, because there were a bunch of board games that came out related to Disneyland in the first couple of years. And I think one of them and then some of them came out like before the park opened, and it's all artwork. And I think one of them for sure, I think calls it Snow White Castle. So it's hard to say, which of those are things that came from Walt in the design planning, or someone like, Marvin Davis or Bill Martin or the actual Imagineers who were working on it. Like, this was the plan, versus a marketing thing where they're just kind of making it up to get, or someone's doing a newspaper article or a board game. You have to kind of, what do you define that as the real planning for that? You know what I'm saying? But I can say that, when you look at the original show set drawings of the castle, way before they build the castle walkthrough, and I'm a big nerd on this. I don't know if I was the art director for the castle walkthrough Return with Tony Baxter back in 2008. So I got really super nerdy on it when I did that project. They planned this from 55 on. It's mentioned in the show set. So even though all the interior pathways and things were not built in 55, they were planned with the show set. And they actually did have some design drawings that were not exactly what they built, but adjacent to, and little voids where, a little scene could be here and a little. So it was always in Walt's mind.
This is like a kind of tangent comparison, but I'd love to ask you, Don, about this, because it reminds me a little bit, as I said, 1955, the castle exists, 1959, the movie comes out. It was a different time for the Walt Disney Company, but I also feel like we kind of had a parallel to that in the 90s with your film, The Lion King, where I believe it was the same day the film came out. We had the parade premiere, if I'm remembering correctly. If not the same day, it was very close. And it was a time. Perhaps it was just less risk. Things cost less money, but I feel like they took more risk in like having faith in their projects. It wasn't like you have to prove that you're a $1 billion movie in order to get this theme park thing. So I don't know. I just think that's kind of an interesting parallel. And
it is. And there's no real rhyme or reason to it. Some movies like Lion King were able to take off as a parade. And even going back to the Disneyland Castle, it made sense that they called it Robin Hood's Castle for 5 minutes, because Disney's Robin Hood movie came out in 1952. So, they were making it while they were designing Disneyland. So that was somewhat interesting. And whereas Snow White was a 20-year-old movie and the castle didn't play a big part in it, it's not like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty where the castle is kind of a central figure. But they're really committed to their what we would call IP today. So Davy Crockett appears in heavy rotation in Frontierland. And yet there's a lot of original material. Pirates of the Caribbean was never dreamed of as a movie, and its ride design and attraction and music, as is the Tiki Room, as is the Haunted Mansion, as is Adventure Through Inner Space, is solely for Disneyland, with great music by the Sherman Brothers usually. And so there was a commitment to things that were unique to Disneyland that, decades later have become movies, but also a fearlessness about saying, okay, Alice in Wonderland's coming out, Disneyland's open for a couple of years, we're going to add Alice as a walkthrough ride and then convert it over to something else. Or Third Man on the Mountain's coming out, let's build a Matterhorn in the middle of the park where there's a little hill of leftover dirt from excavation, So Walt was the consummate 20th century marketeer. He was brilliant at it. And he was going to leave no stone unturned when it came to the ability to market something in the park. And so those kinds of decisions, I think, were easy for them when they were a fit, and they were very bold about committing to spending lots of money. And yet they were also bold about saying, hey, we're going to put a submarine right in. Well, that's based on the submarine movie, isn't it? Well, no, there is no submarine movie, So that kind of thing, I think, is rare these days. It's rare to see that because usually we see park expansions happening with IP, and I get that. It's business and it's good business. But back then it was a very, very different world. The idea of a blockbuster wasn't quite the same. Movies played for a year. The idea of a movie soundtrack was invented by Disney, and the music store on Main Street was kind of a beginning of being able to go in and buy the soundtrack to Disney films. So a lot of that was kind of inventing things that had never been invented before, going back to the idea of a theme park where you could go and experience things that were, yes, maybe in movies that you would see, but maybe not at all. Tom Sawyer Island, well, the real one wasn't necessarily a Tom Sawyer Disney movie, but it was deep in Walt's roots growing up in Missouri, and something that was a no-brainer for him.
Well, everything is so IP driven these days, right? I mean, like everything I work on pretty much is IP driven. You almost can't even get someone to even talk about an idea for an attraction or a land or something without it being related to a current. And it not only does it have to be an IP, it has to be a current popular IP, right? It can't be like a deep cut IP from whatever. And I was just going to say to your thing about, Don's Lion King and all that, from where I sat, I went to, even though I'm not an animator and didn't, never have been a professional animator, I went to CalArts for animation. And so I started in 1990. So 1990, things were very different then. Just like 5 years before, when I was in high school, I was very interested in animation and Disney history in general. And Disney was in this like doldrums, I think people maybe don't realize or forget. And when, Roger Rabbit came out, that was like a big head explosion. And then when Little Mermaid came out, that was even bigger. It was like, because before that, it felt like, oh, Disney animation's kind of dead. And then you had this run. Then you had this streak of Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and Aladdin and all these absolutely incredible, films that did huge numbers at the box office. I think it was a no-brainer to do things like the Lion King parade there. I think, everyone jumped on that pretty quick. The one weird thing that they didn't jump on until way later, and I just remember because I was such a fan of it and it kept trying to promote things when I was at Imagineering, and I kept being told, that's a dog, that movie didn't do well. No, is Nightmare Before Christmas, because I just loved Nightmare Before Christmas when it came out. And I also, as nice as the Nightmare Before Christmas holiday overlay in the Haunted Mansion is, I love Haunted Mansion so much. It really bothers me that for a big chunk of the year, I can't, especially during Halloween, because it's so adjacent to Christmas, I can't ride my beloved Haunted Mansion the way it was originally designed, because it's turned into Nightmare. I feel like Nightmare should be its own little small land with a little dark ride, related to it. And I pitched a lot of that stuff.
Absolutely.
No one ever went for it, but that was kind of interesting that they never locked in on that. Later they did.
Nobody went to see Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, that full stop. And yet now I host these things at the El Capitan every year on Halloween. It sells out in an hour, and there's 1,000 people that show up in costume to watch what is basically a 30-year-old movie, and it's a cult. It's a cult following. That's all I can say.
Like, I was so delighted we got a photo of the Hatbox Ghost actually working, in the attraction the first couple of weeks it did. Because I tried to get that photo in the Mark Davis book and it got cut for some reason. But for years, I was obsessed with the Hatbox Ghost, and I'd always bug Mark Davis about it because he designed it, and he couldn't really remember, and he'd be like, "Well, as I say, Walt didn't like the story," but he couldn't really. I could tell he couldn't really remember. And then he always said this phrase, "As I say," and I've not before or since heard anyone in the world say "as I say," not only just in dropping it in normal conversation, but like with regularity. He always said that. Is weird. Anyway, but the Hatbox Ghost stuff, I tried for years, the same thing, like go around at WDI, say, we should bring the Hatbox Ghost back. I bet you we could crack the code and like figure out how to do it now. And it's such a great design. And it was in there for a few weeks, and people just would say, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard. And I was like, no, it's great. And so there's a very different mindset from like history and nostalgia and deep cuts and all that. Now it's very much like, oh yeah, like let's do that. And you have to give credit to my friend Dan Joseph, who's he's kind of the Yale Gracie of Imagineering now. He's based in Florida, but he's a special effects genius. And he's the guy who figured out how to do the Hatbox Ghost with aplomb. Like, I couldn't have been more happy that he ended up doing it, because it really, boy, it came out amazing.
As we start to wind things down here, I just wanted to, I want to get your opinion on a few different things. And I think that we can all agree probably that, among Disney fans, Disneyland is a very special place because it was the only park that Walt saw realized. And for that reason, for better or worse, it has become a bit of a museum. But we also all know that Walt loved constantly changing and evolving things. So I'm just curious from both of you, we'll start with Don, is there anything from Walt's time that's currently still in the park that you think Walt would have changed by now? And or do you think there's anything that's been removed that Walt would have kept?
Wow. I mean, Walt would have changed it because he would change just about everything starting the very first week the park opened, which I think is an exciting thing for our readers to remember. The opening of the park was for the television show, yes, and it really is still opening, to be honest. I don't know if there's things in there. I mean, the Jungle Cruise has been changed many times and plussed by Mark Davis and Walt, but that's so much of an original opening day attraction that I think there's something there that Walt may have played with more. It hasn't been touched in several decades. And if I were Walt Disney, I would look at that and just go, wow, with the modern technology, what could you do? And Imagineers have certainly played with it as well. So, it's a healthy thing for people to revisit attractions, whether you're Walt Disney or somebody working in the trade, to be able to go back to that, or the Tree House, or the Haunted Mansion or Pirates or something. It's an iconic ride, but I always feel like stories are meant to be told and retold, and it's our job to tell stories in our generation and for our time, and that's works for movies, that works for books, that works for theme park design. It's a different world now than it was in '55, and it's appropriate to take things and adapt them, tear them out, do whatever. And it's also difficult, shocking, and emotional to say, hey, we're in Florida, we're taking Walt Disney World, and we're going to take Tom Sawyer Island out, and Rivers of America, we're going to put something else in there. That is shocking to a degree. And all I can say is, well, knowing Disney, they'll put something in that's spectacular. And will we miss what's there? Yeah, it's very nostalgic. And that's what a special thing to say about a theme park, that we miss things that are gone because they're so much a part of our lives. But I have a lot of confidence that Disney will put something back in there that's equally as fantastic.
Yeah, for me, the thing is, like, especially with Disneyland, but I think with Florida too, people who grew up going there, a lot as a kid, and you're with your family, and, it's part of your family, your childhood memories. And so there's this deep-seated emotional bond that you have that is related to growing up and is related to being with your family. And, so for me, like, if I could mortgage my soul and go invent a time machine and go back and ride Adventure Through Inner Space, or Nature's Wonderland, or the original Knott's Berry Tales at Knott's Berry Farm, or even I want to go back in time. I want to ride a trip to the moon at Luna Park, and or even the original trip to the moon at the Buffalo, New York Fair in the early 1900s. That would be absolutely incredible. But, also because, you have to realize, like, theme park attractions, you can get the Criterion Blu-ray of Citizen Kane tonight, and you can watch it, and you can have an experience watching that film pretty damn close to, like, what Orson Welles intended, or what people in the 1940s experienced, right? Like what they saw in the theater. You can't do that with a theme park attraction because it is a visceral, real world experience. So as cool as it is and would be, like my friend Don Carson did this amazing recreation of the 1958 Claude Coates Alice in Wonderland dark ride, which was amazing and very different from the current version. And he did it in VR. So when you put on the VR headset and experience it, it is like riding it. Now, someone may have snuck him the show set, but, like, I'm just saying, like, that experience is as close as you're going to get to riding the 1958 Alice dark ride. It's still not the same. And so these things are impossible to relive again because they're a real world experience. That, combined with the fact that, a lot of people grew up there, it's related to their family, they rode it a million times, it's nostalgic, it's deep for them. It's like losing a family member to some people. So I can relate to that, right? Like, I mean, I remember going to Knott's Berry Farm in 1986. We didn't have a camcorder yet, but my grandpa got a camcorder, and I thought, I'm going to go film Knott's Berry Tales. And then at the front of the park, there's this big goofy dinosaur crate. And I'm like, what's this? Come to find out they had just shut it down a few weeks ago and I didn't get to film it when I was there. Or Adventure Through Inner Space. I didn't know they were tearing it out for Star Tours. I didn't know the last time I rode Adventure Through Inner Space, that would be the last time I rode it in the 80s. All that to say, the decision to tear out Adventure Through Inner Space, this is going to be heresy. People are going to be shocked hearing me say this, and replace it with Star Tours was absolutely the right decision. Or Knott's Berry Tales. When they redid Knott's Berry Tales at Knott's Berry Farm for the new version, today, people had said, well, why didn't they just recreate the Rolly Crump, the slow moving dark ride version of it? It would have failed spectacularly. It would not play to today's audiences. It doesn't meet the level of excitement and thrill that people expect. So bringing it back to Disneyland, it was the right decision to replace that with Star Tours. I think that's a thing that Walt would have done, right? Like who are the dreamers? Who are the people who are coming up with the most amazing imagination film? Well, George Lucas, in the 80s, right? In the late 70s and early 80s. Indiana Jones adventure, right? That didn't replace something, but still that was absolutely the right call to do something with that IP. And Galaxy's Edge, Rise of the Resistance is one of the most jaw-dropping, incredible, and amazingly designed dark rides I've ever experienced in my life. I had nothing to do with it, but I'm in awe of it. There's so much there that's absolutely incredible. So sometimes you have to kill your babies, and it sucks because you're close to them and you grew up with them. And it makes me so sad that I can't ride Nature's Wonderland again. And I do appreciate, Don and I were at Disneyland last week shooting a promo thing, and just walking around and kind of like identifying like what is old that's still there, and that's fine for things like little facades and things like that. But like major attractions, I think Don's right. I think Walt would have constantly, I think he would have tore more things out over the years than you would have seen and changed things more than you see now, because he would have had new ideas. There would have been new approaches. There would have been things that he would have experimented with that people wouldn't have experimented with. If there's one like constant throughout that man's life, if you study him at all, he never sat still. He was constantly looking to do, he was not interested in looking towards the past. Okay. And so I'm not saying, obviously like our book is drenched in history, right? Like our book is partially because we love it so much and we want to say, look at this. They had leeches on Main Street. Can you believe they had leeches on Main Street? Like, at the Upjohn Pharmacy? That's incredible. Can you believe that you could actually like buy a baby alligator and put it in a box and mail it back to your relatives in Duluth? Like that's crazy pants, right? They shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't have ever done that, right? But, it's like, so we're fascinated by it all. And there's a lot of things that I'd like to go back and see again. But putting in, you have to stay current. You look at Universal Epic. It's such an incredible park, like the things that they've pushed forward with that. And at some point in the next 20, 30 years, there will be attractions at Universal Epic that will be torn out and replaced with other better, newer, bigger ones, because times have changed and there might be a new IP or there might be a different thing, and that's going to be appropriate for that time. So it's a hard thing. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And I understand the frustration and the anger and the, it becomes a very personal thing. But from a operational standpoint, from a creative standpoint, it's the right thing to do. I'm sorry to say, is to keep reinventing yourself and pushing forward, because that's one thing Walt Disney always did. He was always pushing forward. God, Epcot. Come on, Epcot. The city Epcot, not the theme park, but the city Epcot. I can't think of anything more ambitious than that, right?
Honestly, though, even the theme park, I stand inside of Epcot and I look at it and I'm like, this would never be built today like it is. Like, there's so much space that is just for beauty. I don't know. I always think of theme park attractions as living somewhere between a film and theater, where film is forever. Theater is so fragile and just so limited. And I feel like we as humans think of theme park rides and attractions as film. Like they're going to be forever, but they're not. Like they live somewhere between the two. And
they're so closely associated with your childhood and your upbringing. And I think that kind of philosophical part of theme park design is really interesting because, you were saying Nightmare Before Christmas earlier or Emperor's New Groove or something, movies that nobody ever went to see. And now they're cult movies. And I think the same with theme parks. It's so much a part of your childhood and your upbringing. And then you go back there when you have kids and you take them and say, oh, this is where, my grandpa took me when I was a kid. And that kind of cultural touchstone, you see it in places like Tivoli Gardens and, so many places around the world that are just these places where adults and children have the permission to play. And that was something that Walt was totally into, which is there's a permissiveness when you walk in the main gate and under those tunnels for no matter what your age is you can play and be part of the world you're in. We'll supply the buildings and the costumes and the horses and the music. You provide the character and the story you want to provide that day. I mean, that's an earth-shaking idea, and that's why Disneyland's so special.
It's just magic too, Jeff. Like, it's just like when we were there last week, Dawn and I realized we actually had never been to the park together, even though we wrote a book on it. And stepping through the tunnel, right, under the plaque and stepping out into Main Street, it's like stepping into another world. It's magical. There is an inherent magic to Disneyland that does not exist anyplace else. And I don't know if it's because of the beautiful, almost perfect design, or because Walt actually, like, his footsteps are there, or the culmination of all the love that just the people, so many people are there every day that love it so deeply. That's part of it. I don't know what it all is, but there is an indefinable sense of magic when you step through that portal onto Main Street. It's incredible.
Excellent. Well, final question for both of you. We'll start with Christopher. I am personally looking very forward to the Walt Disney audio animatronics figure coming to the Opera House, but I'm curious, is there anything in particular happening during the current 70th anniversary celebration that you're looking most forward to?
I've not seen it yet, so I'm very interested, obviously, to see how that shakes out. I do. I believe the plan is a bunch of the maps that Dawn mentioned that are in the beginning of our book are going to be on display in the Opera House there. So I'm not quite sure where. I haven't seen any of that. So I'm interested to see that. But what I'm most excited about is, I'm just going to be that guy, our signing that Dawn and I are doing in the morning at Downtown Disney, at, I think, Wonderground Gallery, and then in the park at Disneyana. I know a lot of people have wanted to get a copy of the book, and I believe it's been on sale at Downtown Disney, but it's also been sold out everywhere. So you can't get it online until July 17th, I believe. So it's been quite difficult for people to get unless you're a D23 gold member you could choose it as part of your gift. That's what I'm, for the 70th, that's what I'm looking forward to, is actually, like, we worked for 4 years on this book. It was really hard digging up a lot of this material. It was really challenging. But I'm so proud of it. And I'm so, like, grateful to Wendy Lefcon and everyone at Archives and everyone at Imagineering and everyone at the company who got behind this, and Dawn, who championed this thing. I couldn't have done this without Dawn. So just to actually do a signing in the park, like, that's a dream come true for me.
Yeah, same here. It's a privilege. It may seem odd to your listeners. You go like, oh, you guys have been around Disney for a long time, and you're probably a little bored with Disneyland or everything else. It's probably exactly the opposite. I have a greater appreciation for it now, more appreciation for the people from. It was designed by people from animation or people from the film industry, like, or people like Ruth Shellhorn, who was the landscape designer, or Claude Coates, who came from animation, or Ken Anderson, or endless lists of people that we tried to shine a light on. So to actually be in the park and sign books, you kind of feel like, we're not worthy, and to be there with Martha Blandings, Bob Weiss, brilliant Imagineer, is a privilege. And I don't know how else to say it. It is really a privilege. So it'll be great. I mean, the exhibit that's going in with Walt's figure is Kim Irvine designed it. And I saw her the other day, and they're putting in a piece of Walt's apartment there so everybody can see it. They're putting in the maps. They're putting a lot of ephemera from the design of Disneyland. So I think the experience of going into the Opera House and seeing a little bit of the backstory of Disneyland and the history of it, and then being able to see and hear Walt talk, I think is going to be great, especially for a generation who may see Walt as a Betty Crocker kind of character that may or may not have existed. He really existed, and I never knew him, but we all worked with people who did know him, and his philosophy and his ethic and his creativity kind of live on in what we do.
Perfect. Well, folks, the book is The Happiest Place on Earth, the incredible story of Walt Disney's Disneyland. Keep an eye out for it. It's selling out. It'll be online later, but hopefully eventually you can get your hands on it. I'm not kidding when I say I touched a small portion of the notes I had, and there's way more than even my notes had in the book. So, folks, we are scratching the surface with this. Chris, Don, thank you so much for coming on the show to discuss it.
Thank you.
And we're happy to come over to your house. We can go over to your listeners' houses for birthday parties and events. We can make balloon animals and sign books. So
Or bring a big bowl of potato salad, something like that.
all of that, Doritos, which were, by the way, invented at Disneyland. So all of that is available, and we're grateful to your listeners for putting up with us for the last hour and a half.
Now it's time to bring in Meredith from Mini Memories Travel for another Disney vacation tip. But before we get to that, let's talk a bit about some news. How you doing, Meredith?
I'm great, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing pretty darn well. We got some news to talk about. Did you see that we're going back a little bit here, but it was after the last time we talked on May 17th. It was the 4,000th performance of Aladdin on Broadway. And this just so happened to coincide with what would have been Howard Ashman's 75th birthday. Of course, Howard Ashman is the lyricist of, part of Aladdin, but also Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. And, he's given tons of credit, rightfully so, for reshaping Walt Disney Animation Studios and really making that Disney animation renaissance happen in the late 80s. So in order to celebrate, they did something really cool. Did you see this performance that they did after the 4,000th performance?
I did, and I just wish I'd known it was there, because what a night.
Yeah, so folks don't know, Howard Ashman and Alan Menken wrote the music for Little Shop of Horrors, which is a big, originally off-Broadway musical. It's been to Broadway. Now it's currently back off-Broadway, and they've had a really nice, successful, long off-Broadway run where they keep throwing celebrities into the lead roles. And because of that, the cast, or a few of the cast from Little Shop of Horrors came and performed after Aladdin. And then out came the cast, or Belle and the Beast, from the upcoming tour of Beauty and the Beast. And then Jodie Benson came out and sang Part of Your World from Little Mermaid. And of course, Alan Menken showed up after that. So they just had this really nice surprise for folks who were in the audience of Aladdin on Broadway on May 17th. And I was like, this is cool.
Could you imagine if you had no clue, and to be there for that, the number of performances, and be like, wow, Aladdin has really run this long.
Which shocks me. But I don't think Aladdin's very good. Yes. I saw it on tour in Los Angeles, but it's fine. I don't think it's a particularly great Broadway musical. And the fact that it's run for over 10 years now, honestly, kind of blows my mind.
See, and this is the thing where you have your personal moment, right? So I did an Adventures by Disney New York City trip, and they taught us the first dance, and it took us an hour, and we're all like so proud of ourselves. And then they're like, so that's the first 50 seconds of the show. Like, okay.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So you're a fan of the show, it sounds like.
I am, because it has that place of merit. And then afterwards, the audience left and the whole cast came down and met and talked with us. I mean, it's a typical Disney, let's make this really special. Yes, it has a place in my heart because of that. It's the only time I saw it was at that one thing. So I haven't gone back. I haven't brought my family. No, but I did.
Okay, I mean, that says a lot, though, right? Like,
Yeah,
you make Disney recommendations to people, and you haven't been like, oh, you got to go see Aladdin. It's a fine show. There's nothing wrong with it. And to be fair, I was very spoiled for a lot of years with the Aladdin Musical Spectacular at Disney California Adventure, which, granted, not a Broadway show, 45 minutes, but it was high production value for a theme park, and that was much loved by a lot of people. So, we had that for so many years. I don't know. I saw it and I was like, the carpet's the reason to go.
Exactly.
The flying carpet is really mind blowing, and I still don't quite understand how it works. But in any case, 4,000 performances worthy of celebration. The fact that it just so happened to fall on Howard Ashman's, what would have been his 75th birthday, very cool. I'm glad that they celebrated both in a really special way, because, I mean, that's cool. Little Shop of Horrors, followed by Beauty and the Beast, followed by Little Mermaid, followed by Alan Menken. That's awesome.
Exactly. I mean, that's just, that's pinch me. Is this happening if you're there?
Totally. And I'm sure for many people it was very random. They were just going to see the show and got the surprise. So Very cool. Moving on from there, a nice little thing I saw that happened. Do you follow the Disney Legend Awards at all? Do you follow like who receives them and all that stuff?
I haven't, and I should.
Well, the Disney Legend Awards, of course, it's the highest honor you can get from the Walt Disney Company. And at this past year's, in 2024 D23, they have the ceremony, and Martha Blanding received a Disney Legend Award. She got it for her service at the Disney parks. And she, unfortunately, like many others, lost her entire home during the LA fires earlier this year. But because of that, she received a replacement Disney Legend Award during a ceremony at the Walt Disney Studios here in Burbank, California. Not only herself, so I think she was the only one that got the Disney Legend, but of course, every 5 years, I think it is, you also get those service awards from Disney.
Yes.
And so she got all of those replaced. She got her Disney Legend Award replaced. And there were some others who also got their service awards replaced if they lost everything in the LA fires. And I don't know that this necessarily made news, but I saw somebody post about it who was at the ceremony. And I was just like, it's a really, really nice thing to do. Like the company really didn't need to do. And I just thought that was nice and should be mentioned.
I love when those human touches come out. And I think Disney does a pretty good job of those so I don't follow them as I should, but I do have friends who've gotten their service awards and things like that. And now you're making me want to, I'll be tuning in. Because that is an amazing moment that they're going to remember. Yay, they got the award, but remember that Disney did that, and it makes it twice as special.
We did get some official closing dates for Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer Island at Magic Kingdom. They are officially closing on July 7th, 2025. This, of course, is to make way for the new Cars attraction coming to Magic Kingdom. And, we knew this was coming. This was announced a while ago. Some people are very upset about it. And so I'm just hoping anybody that wanted to will get to have their final ride. And, they didn't give a ton of notice. They gave about a month's notice. But I knew back when I was there in March, I was like, this is going away. I'm going to ride the Liberty Bell around the Rivers of America one final time. And so I did. And I hope everybody that wants to gets that chance.
Yeah, they did give enough notice that I've been telling anyone, or people have said when, I had said by the summer. So I'm like, okay, they did it within when it was reasonable. And I do think, an official date is great, because there are those people who are going. I have a friend who's like, I have to go one last time because I have to look for a paintbrush on Tom Sawyer's Island, which they haven't done in a long time, but it's still their memory.
Nice. What's the paintbrush thing? I don't know this.
It is, you used to go on the island and there were 3 paintbrushes hidden for fast passes. And if you turned it in, you got an ultimate fast pass for the day.
Oh my gosh.
So it was back in those fast pass, not where we are now. And so you'd run around. My kids would actually ask to go over there first thing in the morning, which they never had before that. And they're like, we have to go find a paintbrush.
Oh, that's fun. I'd never heard of that. We got some other closing news, although not a specific date. This is just early 2026. And this one, perhaps a bit of a surprise. Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the Rescue at Disney California Adventure will be closing to make way for the new Avatar experience. So ironically, we're closing Monsters, Inc. on the West Coast, and we've closed Muppet Vision 3D on the East Coast to make way for Monsters, Inc. But Hollywoodland at Disney California Adventure, I feel like, has been considered on the chopping block for a long time. So this didn't come as a huge surprise. I will say that Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the Rescue is one of my favorite dark rides at the resort. I think it's just really well done. I admittedly haven't done it in a long time because what used to be a very short wait all the time has been completely destroyed by Lightning Lane. So Lightning Lane has made the standby queue like often long. And I'm just like, I enjoy it, but it ain't worth that wait. And so it's kind of frustrating. So that is officially closing. We are getting an Avatar experience, but even better news kind of related to this, there's also the talk of the Coco ride coming to Disney California Adventure. And we were told it will be near Pixar Pier and Paradise Gardens Park in an area that is currently a backstage space. So I love this. We just talked about how Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the Rescue needs to close in order to make way for Avatar. Coco doesn't really need to close anything. And that's great because honestly, in my mind, for the longest time, I just assumed it was going to be replacing Mermaid. I thought that was
Yeah.
kind of a given. So I'm happy to hear, I love when there are additions to park and not subtractions. And I'm looking really forward to a Coco ride. So that's some good news.
That is good. And I agree with you. More with the amount of people in these parks, we need more, not less, not taking them down.
Absolutely. So that's all coming. And then, we've been talking about it for a while, but it has now officially happened back on June 7th. It was the last day for Muppet Vision 3D at Disney's Hollywood Studios. And did you happen to follow along with any of the celebrations that were happening on social media?
Yes, it was so fun. I mean, it was perfect in my opinion. It was joyous, and people were giving their little stories, and I loved it. I loved it.
I got so much more emotional than I ever anticipated. Like watching these videos on social media, I was genuinely like moved by everything that was happening, and I was so happy to see the long lines and the full house and just some nice moments. Like at one point right toward the end of the day, all the fans hanging out outside of the building started singing Rainbow Connection.
That's the one that got me, and like shivers because that encompasses to my, the Muppets for me.
Yeah, so good. And then we had video of like the doors closing for the final time and the cast members saying thank you. We did get to see that Jim Henson's daughter, his youngest daughter, was the last person to enter and experience the attraction, and she thanked the fans, which was really nice to see as well. Of course, I'm sure people listening know, but just in case they don't, this was the last project that Jim Henson worked on. And so it's a very, very meaningful attraction. I've seen some conspiracy theories out there that I would love to believe, and that is, it kind of makes sense. Although at the same time, I'm like, I just don't believe they would do this. But there was no farewell merchandise for Muppet Vision 3D, and I think they could have made bank on farewell merchandise for Muppet Vision 3D. I mean, how many farewell merchandise offerings have we had for the Main Street Electrical Parade?
Oh my word.
And it's still around. So there are some people out there who are theorizing that because they never had farewell merch, maybe it's not really farewell forever. Maybe it's, some people seem to think it's going to go next to Rock and Roller Coaster when the Muppets take that over in the space that is currently the Villain Show. I would love to believe that. I have a hard time believing that, but I would love to believe that.
I'm with you. I have a hard time believing it, but that location would completely work, and it might be, and they might be right. They might be saying, "Let's hold on," especially with the response. But I guess they wouldn't have known the response to not put out the merch. So I don't know. I don't know where I am in that circle of figuring that out, but that would be amazing.
I feel like they must have known that this was going to be a hard. I mean, even the way they handled it, they gave a ton of notice. They knew that this was going to be a big one to close. So like when the Great Movie Ride closed, there was some fun closing merchandise, and Disney loves anything that can make some extra money. So you'd think they would have had some, but they didn't. So we'll see what that means. In any case, it was a really beautiful, moving final day for the attraction. And, I'm glad it got so much love on that final day. And by the way, if you want to see full video of that final day, like inside the attraction, there's plenty of it out there. So just give it a quick search and you will find it. Anyway, moving on from there, let's move on to some Disney experiences we've had recently. Meredith, anything on your plate? What have you been up to?
I went to Disneyland Paris, which was
nice.
so much fun. It wasn't 100% planned. Like last time we talked, I didn't even know I was going. I did a girls' trip to Paris for the weekend, and then my friends were moving on to the south of France, and I'm like, I'm here. I've never been. Why am I not doing this?
Oh, you had never been to Disneyland Paris?
Never.
Okay. What did you think of, the Disneyland park over there and Sleeping Beauty Castle?
I loved Sleeping Beauty Castle. I loved it. And I spent time walking and reading and doing, and I spent forever with the dragon. I'm like, okay, let me see. Oh, this will be fun. Let me watch him wake up again.
Yep. There's a dragon in the basement of the castle, which is cool. It's honestly, visually, it's my favorite castle. I think it's
Me too.
stunning. Absolutely
Me
stunning. I
too.
think the park as a whole is beautiful. Did you go over to the Walt Disney Studios park as well?
I did. I did. I did it all in one day. It was incredible, incredibly tiring, incredible, but I hit everything.
How was that park? I've never done the second park because when I went, it was only one park. I know it's going through a transformation and
It's some big transformation.
we're getting the name change coming soon. It hasn't changed names yet, correct?
No, it has not.
Okay. So how was it? Like, is it just a construction zone at this point?
It's pretty much. So I started there. So I got there and I'd done all my research and I'm like, I know I want to end in the evening at Disneyland and I want to. So I got right in there and I, on purpose, did not do more research than I've already done because I find it a great thrill to experience a ride for the first time. And so I went in and I know that, so I know Orlando and LA have different rides that are called the same thing. I was shocked by the differences in the attractions there. I was able to do that park in, I think, 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
I banged it out. I really banged it out. And it was cool. Like I did the web slinger. I started at the web slinger, and because of LA, I had the high score on the whole thing because no one else knew how to do it. I'm like, okay, I got this. But then you write other attractions like the Avengers, and I'm like, this is not at all what I thought it would be. It was Rock and Roller Coaster to me. I'm like, okay, that's
Yeah.
what I compare that to.
That's what it used to be.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it is. It still is. It's just themed differently. The Cars Land is for itty bitties. It's much more. They have a tiny section for itty bitties. I love Crush's Roller Coaster because I could see where they got Guardians of the Galaxy from. It was the start of that technology and it was fun and short, but they knocked it out of the park when they did Guardians of the Galaxy at Epcot. I would say you're right. That park is underwhelming. I was shocked how quickly I got it done. I think they did a great job with the language, doing English and French. You weren't sitting through it twice. Even one character would speak in English and one would speak in French, and you'd get it. And I don't speak a lot of French. I can do the polite things. I can ask for whatever, but I can't carry a conversation on in French. So that I thought they did really well. But you're right. I was done, grabbed a bite to eat, done, then went back over to Disneyland Hotel where I stayed, was able to check in by 3, have all my stuff, and be in Disneyland Park before 4 and able to do everything. So you're right. It's definitely not a park that I'd be like, that's a day at. And it's not visually attractive.
That's what I hear. Yeah. What was your favorite thing at the Disneyland park over there?
Oh, Jeff, how do I even? So I'm a small world girl, and Disneyland holds my heart with that. You guys have it so much better than we have it at Disney World. I really enjoyed that, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say that's all that different. But that's for me. That's bringing me back to my very first time at Disney World and that park, and the story of it being something that Walt loved is gonna always get me. I did not like Indiana Jones at all.
That's just a roller coaster over there, right?
And the headrests come here, so your ears just get banged the whole time as you're upside down and everything. And again, I knew it was a roller coaster, hadn't done my a ton of diligence. I knew it was for older kids and whatever. I'm glad I hadn't because I'm not sure I would have ridden it had I done it.
I love Phantom Manor.
That's yeah. That was the first ride I rode when I got in there, so that was my 100% have to do. I agree.
Well, very cool. I'm glad you had a fun little surprise excursion there. That's cool.
Yeah, it was great.
I witnessed a show that they premiered for Season of the Force at Disneyland. It's a projection show called Shadows of Memory, a Skywalker saga. And this projection show is projected on the spires above Millennium Falcon in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. And, listen, Disney has no shortage of projection shows, and I enjoy them all very, very much. But to be honest, my favorite projection shows have often been on Hogwarts Castle over at the Universal Parks. I think that those have been some of the best projection shows. I feel like Shadows of Memory, a Skywalker saga, is like as good, if not better than those. This was so insanely good. And my favorite thing with projection shows is when they project on the, whatever they're projecting on, they make it look like it's crumbling or falling. Like the projection actually looks like what part of whatever you're seeing. And then, when it starts to disintegrate, it actually looks like it's falling apart. They do some amazing work with that. And this isn't just like clips from Star Wars movies. There's like, it's an interesting art style with movement, and it's really superb and highly recommended. My only argument is like this area where you see it near the Millennium Falcon was clearly not meant for like big crowds to be watching fireworks and projection shows, because it's the path to the entrance to Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. So it can get a bit messy, but highly recommend. It was there for, as I said, Season of the Force. I don't know if it's going to stick around longer, but if it's ever there when you're there, definitely check it out. And if it's a fireworks night, you can time it. Typically, you can stay in the same spot and watch Fire of the Rising Moons, which is the Disneyland fireworks show with different Star Wars music being played. So highly, highly, highly recommend.
Oh, now I have to. My son is moving out to LA, so I will be coming more frequently. So that'll be on my list.
Oh, fun. Excellent. I also saw the new Lilo and Stitch movie, the new live action, which I thought was a lot of fun. And it is, doing really, really well at the box office. I will admit, I don't have a huge love of the original film. Like, I don't dislike it. It's just not one of my go-tos. And so I wasn't there analyzing comparisons. I was just kind of enjoying it for its own film. The little girl playing Lilo is just adorable and great. And I don't know about your local movie theaters, but like Stitch has taken over the movie theater in Burbank, California. Like posters everywhere, billboards everywhere, the signage inside everywhere, like the walls plastered in Stitch. It's pretty wild.
Okay, it's not getting that fanfare right near me, and now I need to go. It's actually playing right in my little town, which has 2 screens. I mean, I'm in a tiny town, so I need to go. It had the same for me. It didn't. My kids watched it. That was the era when they were little. So I think I was always just like, if we were watching a movie, it was like, oh, thank goodness mom can sit. I don't know that it was. I didn't take away more than that. So I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, it's really good. So check it out. I very much enjoyed it. One last thing that is not really Disney related, but it is connected. There's a new show on Apple TV Plus called The Studio. Have you heard about this?
No, you are so knowledgeable. I've got to get more up on this, Jeff.
I don't have a life. That's the difference. I don't have kids to worry about and stuff. Well, in any case, it stars Seth Rogen, Catherine O'Hara, Catherine Hahn. Great cast. It's a behind-the-scenes look at Hollywood, which is, scarily accurate, but also over the top and a great comedy. Highly recommend the show. The reason I'm mentioning it is because on the final episode of the first season, it ends with them playing There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. And I was like, oh, hell yes. Not only did I love this show and watching these episodes, but then you're going to end on like my favorite Disney song. So that was great.
Fine, I'll add it to my list. I'm downloading for flights always. So that's
It's a good
the
one.
ad
It's a good one. Perfect. Well, with that, Meredith, what is this month's Disney travel tip?
So I'm taking it back to simple here because it's a question I get more often than any. I don't think of it as super much of a tip per se, but I think it needs to be said. You can bring food into the Disney parks, Jeff. It's a thing that people don't know, and I think is really important for people trying to do Disney on a budget. That's a huge savior, and there are tables around that you can eat at. My other tip, especially in Florida for hydration, is you can get cups of water at any quick service. You just have to go over and ask and say, may I have a cup of water? Now, that's not, as the world is moving to everyone bringing their own bottles in and having refill stations, that's not quite as much, but they'll give you a cup of ice water that can then refresh your carry around water bottle. And I think instead of paying, it can be like $4 for a water bottle, just go and ask for a cup of ice water and they'll give it to you. So these are simple. It's a silly, sounds to me like a silly tip, and I debated sharing it, but people are always needing to find a way to save a little money at Disney, and that's an easy one to do.
Yeah, I do feel like at some point, I don't know if this was ever officially a rule or not, but I do feel like there was this feeling of like you're not allowed to bring in food. And I don't know if that was ever officially a rule. I know at Disneyland Park, there's kind of a picnic area right before the entrance to the park, which kind of insinuates like, hey, enjoy your food before you enter Disneyland. But I don't know if that was ever officially a rule. And it's always good to have a snack because you never know when you're going to get hungry in the middle of a long line. And I got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of water refill stations, not just like water fountains that you can drink out of, but like the ones that are made to refill your bottles. And I was literally having this conversation yesterday with a friend at Universal Studios Hollywood. I just happened to see one. I was like, somebody really needs to write an article about the locations of all of the water refill stations and all of the different theme parks because they're my favorite. I love them.
And I'm with you. And I like getting the cup with the ice first, and then I refill them through the day, and it stays super cold because I have some ice in there.
Yeah.
They do have rules about size of coolers you can bring in and ice packs. So there are some things to check out if you decide you're going to bring in a big cooler, which people were to Disney World, and you'd watch them roll it in. And so they did say when they went through that whole stroller size thing. I don't know, Jeff, if you're up in that business. It was in that, and it was no cooler packs, no loose ice, because they don't want their guards to get hurt reaching in things to look at. So there are some caveats which are easily Googleable or ask me, but you can bring your food in. And like when you have someone on a diet that is restrictive, it's super helpful.
I do remember that time where the stroller size became a huge deal, and like they had stickers on the ground to show you what the size could be and all that stuff, and none of that exists anymore. Have they just gotten more lenient about it, or has the public kind of figured out what are the same rules in place?
The same rules are in place. They're not universally enforced. So it was during that moment, it was that big bed stroller that literally like a small child, like not just a child that should be in a stroller, could like sleep in the damn thing. It was huge, and people were bringing them in, and it was impossible to maneuver. So I think it's two things. They started enforcing it, and then people who did buy the smaller one realized that they couldn't maneuver either. I think it was twofold. It's a great thing for if you're going to the park and you want your kid to sleep in the park and you want to have a night, whatever. But to get through all those people, it had to be just as frustrating as the people pushing it as the people trying to maneuver around it. So I think it was self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told you my stroller rule, which is just a rule that is made up in my head and does not exist. And you, as a person who had children, will be like, oh no, Jeff, I hate this rule. But I have a 7 p.m. stroller curfew rule that I want to see enforced. And my thinking is, guess what? If it's 7 p.m., and a kid needs to be in a stroller, they should probably be heading to bed and getting ready for the night, and, if they can walk, then maybe they can, be up and not have a insane temper tantrum in the middle of the fireworks or something. But if you need to be in a stroller, I think 7 p.m., 7:30, it's a good cutoff time. A hugely unpopular opinion there. But as a person without children, I love the rule.
As a mom of 3, I'm with you. So I always took mine home to nap. We were never big stroller people. I'm like, tire yourselves out, do your thing. I was not a bring a stroller into the park mom. Once we rented one because a child was not able, the youngest was not feeling well, and we were there for the older kids. And I'm like, you know what? Yes. And when your kids are tired, take them home. It's no fun for anyone. I'm with you, Jeff.
Excellent. I love it. Alrighty, folks, you can get Meredith's top 10 tips for visiting Walt Disney World simply by contacting her and asking for the Disney Coast to Coast bonus document with no obligations whatsoever. You can find Meredith's contact info using the Mini Memories travel link in this episode's description. And don't forget, Meredith can help you plan any vacation you'd like at zero cost to you. Alrighty, Meredith, thank you so much. I'll talk to you next month. Go and jet set on your next adventure.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a great month.
Now, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be back next month with another. If you're looking for more before then, be sure to check out the DCTC catalog featuring hundreds of different episodes with a wide array of topics and conversations. If you'd like to hear Don Hahn's previous episodes of Disney Coast to Coast, I've included a link in this episode's description. Also in this episode's description, you can find an affiliate link where you can order your very own copy of the book, The Happiest Place on Earth, The Incredible Story of Walt Disney's Disneyland. DCTC Patreon members can join me and Kyle Burbank from laughingplace.com later this month during our Disney Catch-Up Zoom session. Join by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description. This episode has been executive produced by Jeffrey Riccio. Gain rewards like Jeffrey, including access to never-before-heard episodes and more by becoming a Patreon member yourself. And before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank longtime listener of the podcast, Wit, for a very sweet message he sent me where he states, "Jeff!" all caps. "I just felt the need to tell you how much I loved and looked forward to DCTC every week for so many years. I bow down to you for that commitment. Totally understand the switch to monthly, still enjoying. Whenever I listen to other podcasts or try new ones, I usually end up thinking, wow, this person does not know how to interview or podcast like Jeff DePauli." Wit, thank you so much for taking the time to write that message. It certainly made me feel good. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From the DCTC hotline, where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!